Mute Boy went to the forest every night. After following him, his parents discovered that, in the quiet town of Maplewood, nestled at the edge of an ancient forest, lived the Hawthorne family. Thomas and Eleanor Hawthorne were respected members of the community, known for their kindness and generosity. However, their lives were far from perfect. Their only son, Oliver, was born mute, a condition that had baffled doctors and left the family struggling to find ways to communicate. As Oliver grew older, his parents noticed a change in his behavior. Every night, without fail, the young boy would sneak out of the house, disappearing into the darkness of the forest. At first, Thomas and Eleanor were terrified, fearing for their son's safety. But as weeks turned into months, they realized that Oliver always returned unharmed, his eyes shining with a mysterious light they had never seen before. One balmy summer evening, as the clock struck midnight, Eleanor watched from behind the curtains as her son slipped out the back door. She turned to her husband, worry etched on her face. "Thomas, we can't keep ignoring this. What if something happens to him out there?" Thomas sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "I know, Ellie, but every time we've tried to stop him, he becomes so distressed, it's like he needs to go out there." Eleanor bit her lip, conflicted. Maybe we should follow him, just to make sure he's safe." Thomas nodded slowly, his mind made up. "Tomorrow night. We'll follow him tomorrow night." Little did they know, their decision would unravel a mystery that would change their lives forever. The following night, Thomas and Eleanor prepared for their clandestine mission. Dressed in dark clothes and armed with flashlights, they waited with bated breath as Oliver made his nightly exit. As soon as the back door closed, they slipped out after him, careful to maintain a safe distance. The forest loomed before them, a wall of darkness punctuated by the occasional flicker of moonlight. Oliver moved with surprising confidence, his small form weaving between trees and over fallen logs with practiced ease. His parents, on the other hand, struggled to keep up, their adult frames less suited to the twisting paths of the woods. As they ventured deeper into the forest, Eleanor felt a strange sensation wash over her. The air seemed to thicken, charged with an energy she couldn't explain. She glanced at Thomas, wondering if he felt it too. The look of awe on his face told her he did. Suddenly, Oliver came to a stop in a moonlit clearing. Thomas and Eleanor quickly ducked behind a large oak tree, their hearts pounding. What they saw next left them speechless. Animals began to emerge from the shadows: owls, foxes, deer, and even a majestic stag. They gathered around Oliver, forming a circle of fur and feathers. The boy stood in the center, his face turned up to the moon, a serene smile on his lips. "Thomas," Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling. "What's happening?" Her husband could only shake his head in disbelief. I don't know, Ellie. But look at him. He's happy." As they watched, Oliver approached an ancient tree at the edge of the clearing. He placed his hand on its gnarled trunk, and to the astonishment of his hidden parents, a soft glow began to emanate from the point of contact. Little did Thomas and Eleanor know, this was just the beginning of a revelation that would shake the foundations of their understanding of their son, the forest, and the world around them. As the ethereal light spread from Oliver's hand, Thomas and Eleanor watched in awe as ghostly images began to form in the air around their son. These spectral projections showed scenes from a time long past, humans and animals living in perfect harmony, sharing the forest as equals. Eleanor clutched Thomas's arm, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's like the forest is sharing its memories," she whispered. Thomas nodded, unable to tear his gaze away from the magical display. "But why Oliver? Why our son?" Their questions were interrupted by a new presence in the clearing. A large black wolf, its fur gleaming in the moonlight, stepped out from between the trees. The other animals parted, creating a path for the newcomer. Eleanor gasped, fear gripping her heart as she watched the wolf approach her son. But Oliver showed no sign of fear. Instead, he turned to face the wolf, his posture relaxed and welcoming. To the parents' amazement, the wolf bowed its head to Oliver, as if acknowledging him as a leader or an equal. Oliver reached out, gently placing his hand on the wolf's head in a gesture of acceptance and friendship. As this extraordinary scene unfolded, a rustling in the bushes behind Thomas and Eleanor made them jump. They turned to find an old woman standing there, her silver hair gleaming in the moonlight, her eyes twinkling with ancient wisdom. "You must be Oliver's parents," she said, her voice soft but carrying easily in the quiet of the forest. "I've been expecting you." Thomas and Eleanor exchanged shocked glances. Who was this woman? And how did she know about Oliver? "My name is Arya," the old woman continued. "I am the keeper of the forest's secrets, and I believe it's time you learned the truth about your extraordinary son." With that, Arya gestured for them to follow her, leading them deeper into the heart of the forest, away from Oliver and his animal companions. As they walked, Thomas and Eleanor felt as if they were crossing a threshold into a world they never knew existed, one where the line between reality and magic blurred into insignificance. Arya led Thomas and Eleanor to a small cottage hidden so well among the trees that they would have missed it if not for her guidance. The interior was warm and inviting, filled with the scent of herbs and flickering candlelight. "Please, sit," Arya said, gesturing to a pair of comfortable chairs. As Thomas and Eleanor settled in, still reeling from what they had witnessed, Arya busied herself preparing tea. "I'm sure you have many questions," she began, handing them each a steaming cup. "About Oliver, about the forest, about what you've seen tonight." Eleanor nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she held her tea. "Who are you, really? And what's happening to our son?" Arya smiled gently. "I am the latest in a long line of guardians, chosen by the forest itself to protect its secrets and maintain the balance between the human world and the natural one. And your son, Oliver, he is special, very special indeed." Thomas leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Special how?" "Oliver was born with a gift," Arya explained. "Her connection to the forest and its inhabitants that few humans have ever possessed. His inability to speak isn't a disability, it's a sign of his attunement to the natural world. He doesn't need words because he can communicate in a much more profound way." Eleanor's eyes widened with understanding. "That's why he's always been so drawn to the forest. But why didn't we know about this before?" Arya's expression turned serious. "The forest's magic reveals itself only to those who are ready to see it. Oliver's nightly visits have been preparing him, and you, for this moment. The forest has chosen him as its next guardian, to take my place when the time comes." Thomas and Eleanor sat in stunned silence, trying to process this information. Their son, their quiet, gentle Oliver, was destined to become the protector of an ancient, magical forest. "But he's just a boy," Thomas protested weakly. Arya nodded sympathetically. "Yes, he is. And he will need your love and support more than ever as he grows into his role. The path ahead won't be easy, but it is his destiny." As the night wore on, Arya shared more about the history of the forest, the role of the guardian, and the challenges that lay ahead for Oliver and his family. With each revelation, Thomas and Eleanor felt their world expand, filling with wonder and possibility they had never imagined. As dawn began to break, Arya led them back to the edge of the forest. "Remember," she said, "Oliver's gift is precious and must be protected. There are those who would seek to exploit it if they knew." With that warning lingering in their minds, Thomas and Eleanor made their way home, knowing that their lives and their understanding of their son would never be the same again. The following weeks were a whirlwind of adjustment for the Hawthorne family. Armed with their new knowledge, Thomas and Eleanor watched their son with fresh eyes, noticing the subtle ways he interacted with the world around him, the gentle touch he gave to plants, the way animals seemed drawn to him even in the bustling town square. It all took on new meaning. They decided to approach Oliver about what they had seen, unsure of how he would react to knowing his secret nighttime adventures had been discovered. To their surprise, Oliver's face lit up with joy when they broached the subject. He eagerly led them to his room, where he pulled out a drawer filled with intricate drawings, scenes from the forest, portraits of animals, and mystical symbols they now recognized from Arya's cottage. Eleanor hugged her son tightly, tears in her eyes. "Oh, Oliver, we're so proud of you, and we want you to know that we support you no matter what." Thomas ruffled Oliver's hair affectionately. "That's right, son. Your mother and I may not understand everything about your gift, but we're here for you, always." Oliver's smile was radiant as he hugged his parents back. For the first time, they felt truly connected to their son, the barriers of misunderstanding finally broken down. However, their newfound peace was soon to be tested. One sunny afternoon, a sleek black car pulled up in front of the Hawthorne home. A man in an expensive suit stepped out, his calculating gaze sweeping over the quaint house. Inside, Eleanor tensed as she peered through the curtains. "Thomas," she called, her voice tight with worry. "I think we have a visitor." Thomas joined her at the window, his expression darkening as he watched the stranger approach their front door. "I don't like the look of this, Ellie. Where's Oliver?" "In the backyard, I think. Should we—" Before Eleanor could finish her thought, a sharp knock rang out. Thomas squared his shoulders and moved to answer the door, Eleanor close behind him. The man on their porch smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. and Mrs. Hawthorne, my name is Garrett Pierce. I represent a research organization called the Prometheus Institute. We've heard some interesting things about your son, and I was hoping we could have a chat." Thomas and Eleanor exchanged a worried glance. Aria's warning echoed in their minds. There are those who would seek to exploit it if they knew. As they invited Mr. Pierce inside, both parents knew that they were facing their first test as the protectors of Oliver's secret. The question was, were they ready for what was to come? Garrett Pierce sat in the Hawthornes' living room, his posture rigid and his eyes constantly darting around as if searching for something. Thomas and Eleanor perched on the edge of their seats, tension radiating from their bodies. "So, Mr. Pierce," Thomas began, his voice carefully neutral, "you mentioned you've heard things about our son. May I ask what exactly you've heard, and from whom?" Pierce's smile was cold and calculating. "Oh, you know how small towns are, Mr. Hawthorne. Word gets around. We've heard that your son has a special connection with nature, that animals behave strangely around him, that he spends a lot of time in the forest." Eleanor's hands clenched in her lap. "Oliver has always been fond of nature. Yes, but I'm not sure I understand your interest in our son." "The Prometheus Institute is dedicated to studying and harnessing the untapped potential of the human mind," Pierce explained, leaning forward. "So we believe your son may have abilities that could be of great interest to our research." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. "I'm sorry, Mr. Pierce, but Oliver is just a normal boy. I'm afraid you've been misled by town gossip." Pierce's eyes narrowed slightly. "Are you sure about that, Mr. Hawthorne? We have sources that suggest otherwise. Perhaps a demonstration." "No," Eleanor interrupted firmly. "Our son is not a research subject. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." For a moment, Pierce's friendly facade slipped, revealing a flash of frustration and something darker. But as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, replaced by a polite smile. "Of course, I understand. These matters can be overwhelming. Here's my card. Please, think about what I've said. The opportunities for Oliver, and for your family, could be extraordinary." As Thomas showed Pierce out, Eleanor hurried to the backyard. She found Oliver sitting cross-legged on the grass, surrounded by a group of squirrels and birds. The animals scattered as she approached, and Oliver looked up at her with questioning eyes. "It's okay, sweetheart," Eleanor said, kneeling beside him. "Everything's fine. But listen, if anyone ever asks you about the forest or the animals, or wants you to show them what you can do, you come tell Daddy or me right away. Okay?" Oliver nodded solemnly, sensing the urgency in his mother's voice. Back inside, Thomas and Eleanor conferred in hushed tones. "We need to talk to Aria," Thomas said. "If people are starting to notice Oliver's gift, we need to know how to protect him." Eleanor nodded, her face pale with worry. "And we need to find out more about this Prometheus Institute. I don't trust them, Thomas. The way that man looked at our son, it was like he saw a specimen, not a child." As night fell, the Hawthornes prepared for another journey into the forest, this time as a family. They knew that the safety of their son, and perhaps the ancient secrets of the forest itself, depended on the decisions they would make in the coming days. Little did they know, Garrett Pierce was still in town, and he had no intention of giving up on his pursuit of Oliver Hawthorne. The Hawthorne family made their way into the forest under the cover of darkness. Oliver led the way, moving with the same confidence he showed during his solo nighttime adventures. Thomas and Eleanor followed close behind, their senses alert for any sign of danger or unwanted observers. As they approached the familiar clearing, Arya emerged from the shadows, her silver hair gleaming in the moonlight. She smiled warmly at Oliver, who rushed forward to embrace her. "I see you've decided to join your son on his nightly excursions," Arya said, turning to Thomas and Eleanor. "Then I'm glad. There's much you need to learn, and time is growing short." Eleanor stepped forward, her voice tight with worry. "Arya, someone came to our house today. A man from something called the Prometheus Institute. He knows about Oliver, or at least he suspects." Arya's face darkened. "The Prometheus Institute." She spat the name like a curse. "They've been sniffing around these parts for years, always searching for ways to exploit the forest's magic for their own gain." "What do they want with Oliver?" Thomas asked, pulling his son close protectively. "Power," Arya said simply. "They believe that by studying those with gifts like Oliver's, they can find a way to harness the forest's energy for themselves. But they don't understand the delicate balance that must be maintained. Their meddling could destroy everything." Oliver tugged on his father's sleeve, his eyes wide with concern. Thomas knelt down to his son's level. "Don't worry, buddy. We won't let anything happen to you or the forest." Arya nodded approvingly. "That's the spirit. Now, it's time to begin your training. All of you." Over the next few hours, Arya taught the Hawthorns the basics of forest magic. She showed them how to listen to the whispers of the trees, how to blend into the shadows to avoid detection, and how to call on the animals for help if needed. Oliver, of course, was a natural. His parents watched in awe as he communicated silently with the creatures of the forest, his hands moving in intricate gestures that seemed to carry meaning to the animals around him. As dawn approached, Arya gathered the family close. "Remember," she said, her voice grave, "the Prometheus Institute is persistent and resourceful. They won't give up easily. You must be vigilant. And you must keep Oliver's abilities a secret from everyone outside this forest." Thomas and Eleanor nodded, the weight of their new responsibility settling on their shoulders. As they prepared to leave, Oliver suddenly stiffened, his head tilted as if listening to something only he could hear. Arya's eyes widened. "What is it, child? What do you sense?" Oliver pointed urgently towards the edge of the forest, his expression troubled. Arya closed her eyes, reaching out with her own senses. When she opened them again, her face was grave. "Someone's entered the forest," she said. "Someone who doesn't belong." The tension in the clearing was palpable as Arya's words hung in the air. Thomas instinctively moved closer to Oliver, while Eleanor scanned the tree line, her newly awakened senses straining to detect any sign of the intruder. "What do we do?" Thomas whispered, his voice tight with concern. Arya's eyes narrowed as she considered their options. "We need to lead them away from here. The heart of the forest must remain protected." She turned to Oliver, her expression softening. "Child, I need you to call upon your friends. We'll need their help." Oliver nodded solemnly, closing his eyes in concentration. Within moments, a soft rustle echoed through the clearing as various woodland creatures emerged from the undergrowth, a majestic stag, several foxes, a family of raccoons, and even a pair of wolves gathered around the boy, awaiting his silent instructions. "Thomas, Eleanor," Arya said, her voice low and urgent, "take Oliver and head deeper into the forest. The animals will create a diversion to lead the intruder away. I'll make sure they don't follow you." Eleanor hesitated, worry etched on her face. "But what about you? Will you be safe?" Arya smiled reassuringly. "I've protected this forest for longer than you can imagine. I'll be fine. Now go, quickly." As the Hawthorns retreated into the depths of the woods, Arya turned to face the direction of the intruder. She raised her arms, and the very air seemed to shimmer around her. The trees groaned and creaked, their branches intertwining to create an impenetrable barrier. Meanwhile, Oliver's animal companions sprang into action. The stag crashed through the underbrush, creating a cacophony of noise that drew attention away from the fleeing family. Foxes darted between trees, their russet coats flashing tantalizingly in the pre-dawn light, leading the intruder on a wild chase. As they ran, Thomas and Eleanor marveled at how easily they moved through the forest now. It was as if the trees themselves were parting to ease their passage, while simultaneously closing ranks behind them to obscure their trail. After what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, they reached a secluded grove that hummed with ancient power. At its center stood a massive oak tree, its trunk easily as wide as their house. Oliver approached it without hesitation, placing his small hand on its gnarled bark. To his parents' amazement, a door-sized section of the trunk swung open, revealing a cozy interior lit by softly glowing fungi. "I think we're meant to hide in here," Eleanor whispered, ushering her family inside. As soon as they entered, the tree closed behind them, sealing them in its protective embrace. Inside the tree, time seemed to stand still. They huddled together, listening intently for any sign of pursuit. Oliver sat cross-legged on the earthen floor, his eyes closed in concentration, seemingly communing with the forest itself. After what felt like an eternity, they heard Arya's voice, muffled but distinct, coming from outside their wooden sanctuary. "It's safe now, you can come out." As the tree opened once more, they emerged to find Arya waiting for them, looking tired but triumphant. "The intruder has been led astray," she announced. "He's currently wandering in circles near the eastern border, thoroughly confused and more than a little spooked." Thomas let out a relieved sigh. "Was it the man from the Prometheus Institute?" Arya nodded grimly. "Indeed it was. Garrett Pierce is not a man to be underestimated. He'll be back, and next time he'll likely bring reinforcements." Eleanor hugged Oliver close. "What do we do now? We can't live in fear of them coming after our son." Arya's eyes twinkled with a hint of mischief. "Now, my dears, we prepare. The forest has chosen your family as its guardians, and it's time you learn to use all the tools at your disposal." As the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the canopy, the Hawthorns realized that their lives had irrevocably changed. They were no longer just a family trying to understand their unique son. They were now the front line of defense for an ancient and powerful force of nature. With renewed determination, they followed Arya deeper into the forest, ready to begin their training in earnest. The battle for the forest's future, and Oliver's, had only just begun. In the weeks that followed, the Hawthorn family fell into a new routine. By day, they maintained their normal lives in town, careful not to arouse suspicion. But each night, they ventured into the forest for intensive training with Arya. Oliver's abilities grew by leaps and bounds. He learned to communicate with a wider range of creatures, from the tiniest insects to the birds soaring high above the canopy. His parents watched in awe as he conjured illusions, bending light and shadow to create lifelike mirages that could fool even the keenest observer. Thomas and Eleanor, too, were developing skills they never imagined possible. Thomas discovered an affinity for plant life, learning to accelerate growth and even shape living wood. Eleanor, on the other hand, found she had a talent for forest medicine, able to concoct powerful remedies from seemingly ordinary herbs and flowers. But their training wasn't solely focused on magic. Arya stressed the importance of more mundane skills as well. "The best defense," she told them one evening, "is to convince our enemies that there's nothing here to find. You must become masters of misdirection and deception." And so they practiced. They learned to weave plausible stories to explain Oliver's connection to nature, to deflect curiosity with half-truths and carefully crafted explanations. It was a delicate balance, maintaining their integrity while protecting their vital secret. As autumn approached, bringing with it a riot of color to the forest, Arya deemed them ready for their first true test. "The Prometheus Institute will not give up easily," she warned. "They will return, likely with more resources and determination than before. We must be prepared to face them on multiple fronts." She turned to Oliver, her eyes serious. "Young Guardian, you have a crucial role to play. When they come, and they will come, you must appear to be nothing more than a normal, if somewhat odd, young boy. Can you do this?" Oliver nodded solemnly, understanding the gravity of the situation despite his young age. Arya smiled approvingly before addressing Thomas and Eleanor. "And you, my friends, must be the first line of defense. Use every skill you've learned, both magical and mundane, to throw them off the scent. The forest will aid you, but the primary burden falls on your shoulders." As if on cue, a blue jay swooped into the clearing, landing on Oliver's outstretched hand. The boy's eyes widened as he listened to the bird's silent message. "What is it, honey?" Eleanor asked, a note of concern in her voice. Oliver gestured urgently towards town, his expression grave. Arya closed her eyes, reaching out with her senses, before opening them with a sharp intake of breath. "They're here," she said grimly. "A team from the Prometheus Institute has just arrived in town. It seems our time for preparation has run out." Thomas squared his shoulders, meeting his wife's determined gaze. "Then it's time to put our training to the test." As they made their way back to the edge of the forest, the very trees seemed to whisper encouragement. The Hawthorns knew that the coming days would challenge them in ways they had never imagined, but they were ready. With the ancient power of the forest at their backs and the love for their son driving them forward, they prepared to face whatever the Prometheus Institute might throw their way. Little did they know, the true extent of their adversaries' resources and determination was about to become frighteningly clear. The arrival of the Prometheus Institute team sent ripples of tension through the small town of Maplewood. Sleek black vehicles with tinted windows prowled the streets, and men and women in crisp suits conducted interviews with locals under the guise of a scientific survey. For the Hawthorns, every day became a careful dance of normalcy and vigilance. They went about their routines, Thomas to his job at the local hardware store, Eleanor to her part-time work at the library, and Oliver to school, all while keeping their senses attuned to any sign of threat. At first, the Institute's approach seemed indirect. They set up a temporary research station on the outskirts of town, ostensibly to study the local ecosystem. But the Hawthorns and Arya knew better. This was merely a front for their true intentions. One crisp autumn morning, as Oliver waited for the school bus, a friendly-looking woman approached him. "Hello there," she said with a warm smile. "I'm Dr. Evelyn Carter from the Prometheus Institute. We're doing a study on gifted children in the area. I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions." Oliver, remembering his training, simply shrugged and shook his head, pointing to his throat to indicate his inability to speak. Dr. Carter's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, I see. Well, perhaps we could communicate in writing. I've heard you're quite artistic." Before Oliver could respond, Eleanor appeared at his side, having watched the interaction from the porch. "I'm sorry," she said firmly, "but we don't allow Oliver to speak with strangers, especially about personal matters. I'm sure you understand." Dr. Carter's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly before her professional demeanor reasserted itself. "Of course, I completely understand. Perhaps we could schedule a time to speak with you and your husband. We're very interested in the developmental patterns of children in this area." Eleanor forced a polite smile. "We'll think about it. Now, if you'll excuse us, Oliver needs to catch his bus." As they watched Dr. Carter walk away, Eleanor knelt beside her son. "You did well, sweetheart. Remember, no matter what they ask or offer, you must not show them anything unusual. Can you do that?" Oliver nodded solemnly, his eyes wise beyond his years. That evening, the Hawthorns met Arya deep in the forest to report on the day's events. The old guardian listened intently, her brow furrowed with concern. "They're being cautious for now," Arya mused. "But that won't last. We need to be prepared for more aggressive tactics." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his voice. "How long can we keep this up? They have resources, manpower. We're just one family." Arya's eyes glinted in the fading light. "Ah, but you have something they don't. The forest itself as your ally. And tonight, we're going to ensure that Alliance is stronger than ever." She led them to a part of the forest they had never seen before, where the trees grew so densely that the canopy above blotted out the sky entirely. In a small clearing stood a circle of ancient standing stones, each one carved with symbols that seemed to shift and change as they watched. "This is the heart of the forest's power," Arya explained. "Tonight, we will perform a ritual to bind your family more closely to this land. It will enhance your abilities and make it even harder for outsiders to perceive the truth." As the moon rose, hidden from view by the thick canopy, but felt in their very bones, the Hawthorns joined hands with Arya in the center of the stone circle. Words of an ancient language fell from Arya's lips, and the air around them began to shimmer and pulse with energy. Oliver's eyes widened in wonder as he felt the forest's power flow through him, stronger than ever before. Thomas and Eleanor gasped as new awareness bloomed in their minds. They could feel every tree, every creature in the forest, as if they were extensions of their own bodies. As the ritual reached its crescendo, a blinding light erupted from the standing stones, enveloping the family in its warm embrace. When it faded, the Hawthorns felt fundamentally changed, more connected, more alive, more powerful. Arya smiled at them, a mixture of pride and sadness in her eyes. "You are truly guardians of the forest now, but remember, with great power comes great responsibility and great danger. The Prometheus Institute will stop at nothing to uncover your secrets. We must be prepared for whatever comes next." As they made their way home under the cover of darkness, the Hawthorns knew that the true test was yet to come. The siege had begun, and the battle for the forest's future and their own was far from over. As autumn deepened into winter, the presence of the Prometheus Institute became an ever-present shadow over Maplewood. Their researchers were a common sight around town, always watching, always asking questions. The locals, initially curious about the influx of outsiders, grew increasingly uneasy with their persistent probing. For the Hawthorns, every day felt like walking a tightrope. They had to maintain an appearance of normalcy while constantly being on guard. Oliver, showing wisdom beyond his years, played the role of an ordinary, if silent, boy to perfection. But the strain was beginning to show on all of them. One frosty morning, Thomas was approached by Garrett Pierce as he opened up the hardware store. "Mr. Hawthorne," Pierce said, his breath visible in the cold air, "I hope you've had time to reconsider our offer. The Prometheus Institute could provide incredible opportunities for your son." Thomas steeled himself, drawing on the calm strength of the forest that now flowed through him. "Mr. Pierce, as I've said before, we're not interested. Oliver is happy here, and we intend to keep it that way." Pierce's friendly demeanor slipped for a moment, revealing a flash of frustration. "I don't think you understand the gravity of the situation, Mr. Hawthorne. We know there's something special about your son, about this forest. We will uncover the truth, with or without your cooperation." As Pierce walked away, Thomas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. He knew they needed to warn Arya immediately. That night, under the cover of a gentle snowfall, the Hawthorns made their way into the forest. The bare trees whispered warnings as they passed, their branches creaking with an unseen tension. Arya met them in the stone circle, her face grave. "The forest is restless," she said without preamble. "It senses a great threat approaching." Eleanor hugged Oliver close. "What can we do? They're everywhere, watching our every move." Arya's eyes glinted with determination. "We must strike first, not with violence, but with misdirection. It's time to show the Prometheus Institute exactly what we want them to see." Over the next few days, the Hawthorns and Arya put their plan into action. Using their newfound powers, they created a series of elaborate illusions throughout the forest. False trails led to empty caves that seemed to whisper with hidden power. Shadowy figures flitted between trees, always just out of sight. Strange lights danced in the mist, leading researchers on wild goose chases. Oliver's role was crucial. Under the guise of a school nature project, he led a group of classmates and their Prometheus Institute shadows on a hike through carefully prepared parts of the forest. To the watching researchers, the boy seemed to have an uncanny knack for finding interesting wildlife, but nothing that couldn't be explained away as luck or keen observation. As the Prometheus team frantically chased phantoms and false leads, the real heart of the forest remained protected, its true power hidden beneath layers of deception. But even as their plan seemed to be working, a new complication arose. Dr. Evelyn Carter, the researcher who had first approached Oliver, began to spend more time in town. She volunteered at the library where Eleanor worked, struck up friendships with locals, and seemed genuinely interested in the community. One evening, as Eleanor was locking up the library, Dr. Carter approached her with a warm smile. "Mrs. Hawthorne, I know we got off on the wrong foot, but I hope you can see that we're not the enemy here. We truly want to understand this place, this community, and I believe your family holds the key to unlocking its secrets." Eleanor hesitated, caught off guard by the woman's sincerity. For a moment, she was tempted to confide in her, to share the burden of the secret they'd been carrying. But then she remembered Arya's warnings, the feeling of the forest's power flowing through her veins. "Dr. Carter," she said carefully, "I appreciate your interest in our town, but my family's business is our own. I hope you can respect that." As she walked away, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that they had just entered a new and more dangerous phase of this conflict. The lines between friend and foe were blurring, and she feared that one wrong move could bring everything crashing down around them. Little did she know, Dr. Carter was watching her retreat with a calculating gaze, already formulating a new approach to unravel the mystery of the Hawthorns and the forest they so fiercely protected. As winter gave way to the first tentative signs of spring, the standoff between the Hawthorns and the Prometheus Institute reached a critical point. The researchers, frustrated by months of dead ends and inexplicable phenomena, were becoming increasingly aggressive in their tactics. One crisp morning, Oliver arrived at school to find a new teaching assistant in his classroom. The woman, with her kind smile and gentle demeanor, seemed harmless enough. But Oliver's heightened senses, honed by months of training with Arya, detected something off about her. He noticed how her eyes followed him constantly, how she always seemed to be nearby during recess and lunch. That evening, as the Hawthorns gathered for dinner, Oliver communicated his concerns through a series of gestures and drawings. Thomas and Eleanor exchanged worried glances. "They're getting bolder," Thomas said, his voice low. "We need to be extra careful now." Eleanor nodded, her face etched with concern. "I think it's time we considered more drastic measures." The next day, Eleanor made her way to the library as usual, but instead of heading inside, she slipped around the back of the building where Dr. Evelyn Carter was waiting. "Mrs. Hawthorne," Dr. Carter said, her eyes gleaming with barely contained excitement. "I'm so glad you reached out. I knew you'd come around eventually." Eleanor took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she was about to do. "Dr. Carter, what I'm about to tell you must remain between us. The safety of my family depends on it." As Eleanor spun a carefully crafted tale of half-truths and misdirection, she could see Dr. Carter hanging on her every word. She spoke of ancient tribal legends, of a connection to nature that ran deeper than science could explain, but always stopped short of revealing the true extent of their abilities or the forest's power. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, Thomas and Oliver were meeting with Arya. The old guardian listened intently as they explained their plan. "It's risky," Arya warned, her eyes grave. "If they discover you've deceived them—" "We don't have a choice," Thomas insisted. "They're closing in. We need to give them something, or they'll never stop searching." Arya nodded slowly. "Very well. But remember, the forest will support you only as long as you protect its true secrets. Be careful." My friends, over the next few weeks, the Hawthorns put their plan into action. They allowed the Prometheus team controlled access to certain parts of the forest, areas where the magic was subtle enough to be dismissed as unusual but natural phenomena. Oliver demonstrated minor abilities that could be attributed to heightened sensitivity rather than true supernatural power. Dr. Carter and her team were elated, believing they were finally making progress. They ran tests, took samples, and compiled reams of data. But always, the Hawthorns and Arya stayed one step ahead, using their deep connection to the forest to manipulate what the researchers saw and experienced. As spring bloomed in full force, the Prometheus Institute began to wind down their operation in Maplewood. Their final report spoke of unusual electromagnetic fields, rare plant compounds with potential medicinal properties, and a unique ecosystem worthy of further study, but nothing that hinted at the true magic that pulsed at the heart of the forest. On the day the last of the black cars pulled out of town, the Hawthorns breathed a collective sigh of relief. They had weathered the storm, protected their secret, and kept the forest safe. That night, as they celebrated with a quiet dinner in their backyard, Oliver suddenly stiffened, his eyes wide with alarm. A moment later, a familiar figure emerged from the tree line. Arya, her face pale and her steps unsteady. "It's not over," she gasped, collapsing into a chair. "They found something. Something I hoped would remain hidden forever." As the Hawthorns gathered around her, their hearts pounding with renewed fear, they realized that their victory had been short-lived. The true battle for the forest's future was only just beginning. Arya's unexpected appearance and ominous words cast a shadow over the Hawthorns' celebration. They quickly ushered her inside, away from prying eyes and ears. Once settled in the living room, Arya took a deep breath and began to speak. Long ago, before I became the Guardian, there was an artifact of immense power hidden deep within the forest. It was said to be a crystalline seed, the very essence of the forest's magic condensed into physical form. Thomas leaned forward, his brow furrowed. And the Prometheus Institute found this seed? Arya shook her head. No, but they found references to it in some ancient texts they uncovered. If they were to find the seed and harness its power, it could mean the end of everything we've fought to protect. Eleanor's eyes widened with realization. That's why Dr. Carter seemed so excited in our last meeting. She mentioned something about a breakthrough, but wouldn't give me details. Oliver, who had been listening intently, suddenly began to gesture animatedly. His parents watched in amazement as he sketched a rough map of the forest, pointing to a location they had never explored. Arya's eyes lit up with understanding. Of course, the boy's connection to the forest is stronger than I realized. He's pointing to the Grove of Whispers, a place so saturated with magic that even I rarely venture there. Thomas stood up, determination etched on his face. Then that's where we need to go. We have to find this seed before the Prometheus Institute does. As they prepared for their journey, gathering supplies and donning warm clothes, a sense of finality settled over the Hawthorn family. They all understood, without needing to say it aloud, that this could be their most dangerous adventure yet. Under the cover of night, they slipped into the forest. The trees seemed to bend towards them, their branches creating a natural canopy that shielded them from view. Oliver led the way, moving with a surety that belied his young age. As they ventured deeper into uncharted territory, the forest around them began to change. The air grew thick with an almost tangible magic, making it difficult to breathe. Lights danced between the trees, not the illusions they had created to mislead the researchers, but real manifestations of the forest's power. Finally, they reached a clearing unlike anything they had ever seen. Ancient trees, their trunks wider than houses, formed a perfect circle. In the center stood a single sapling, its leaves shimmering with an otherworldly light. The Grove of Whispers, Arya breathed, her voice filled with awe. I haven't been here in centuries. As they approached the sapling, they could hear whispers on the wind, snippets of conversations from ages past, secrets of the forest given voice. Oliver stepped forward, drawn to the tree as if by an invisible force. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to tremble. Roots erupted from the earth, forming a protective barrier around the sapling. A voice, ancient and powerful, echoed through the grove. Who dares to seek the heart of the forest? The Hawthorns froze, unsure how to respond, but Oliver, showing no fear, stepped forward and placed his hand on one of the roots. To everyone's amazement, the barrier receded, and the sapling's glow intensified. From within the tree's trunk, a small object began to materialize, a crystal seed, pulsing with energy. Arya gasped. Found the seed at its choosing Oliver as its guardian. As Oliver reached out to take the seed, a blinding light engulfed the grove. When it faded, the Hawthorns found themselves back in their own backyard, the crystal seed safely clutched in Oliver's hand. Arya looked at them, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and concern. You've been chosen for a great responsibility. The seed is safe for now, but the Prometheus Institute won't give up easily. We must prepare for their return. As dawn broke over Maplewood, the Hawthorn family stood united, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They had become more than just guardians of a secret. They were now the protectors of the very essence of the forest's magic. Little did they know, their greatest test was yet to come. Weeks passed, and life in Maplewood settled into an uneasy calm. The Hawthorns went about their daily routines, all while keeping the crystal seed hidden and protected. Oliver, now fully embracing his role as the seed's guardian, spent hours each day communing with it, his understanding of the forest's magic growing exponentially. But their peace was short-lived. One stormy night, as thunder rattled the windows of their home, Arya appeared in their living room, her face grave. "They're coming," she said, without preamble. "Shouts at the Prometheus Institute has deciphered more of the ancient texts. They know about the seed, and they're bringing everything they have to claim it." Thomas and Eleanor exchanged determined glances. They had prepared for this moment, but the reality of it still sent a chill down their spines. "How long do we have?" Thomas asked, already moving to gather their emergency supplies. "Hours at most," Arya replied. "We need to move the seed to the heart of the forest. It's our only chance of protecting it." As they hurried to prepare, Oliver stood quietly by the window, the crystal seed glowing softly in his hands. His parents noticed a change in him, a newfound maturity and resolve that seemed beyond his years. Just as they were about to leave, headlights flooded the street outside. Black SUVs screeched to a halt in front of their house, and armed men in tactical gear poured out. "Out the back!" Eleanor whispered urgently. They slipped into the forest just as the front door burst open. As they ran, they could hear shouts and the beam of flashlights cutting through the trees behind them. The forest seemed to come alive around them, branches reaching down to block their pursuers' paths, roots rising to trip those who got too close. But the Prometheus team was relentless, pushing through every obstacle. As they neared the heart of the forest, Dr. Carter's voice rang out through a megaphone. "Hawthorns, we know you have the seed. Think about what we could accomplish together. The power to change the world is in your hands." Eleanor felt a moment of doubt. What if they were making a mistake? Could the seed's power be used for good in the right hands? But then she looked at Oliver, saw the unwavering determination in his eyes, and knew they were doing the right thing. The seed belonged to the forest, and only the forest could decide how its power should be used. They reached the standing stones just as the first rays of dawn began to pierce the canopy. Arya quickly began the ritual to bind the seed to the forest permanently, her voice rising in an ancient chant. Suddenly, a shot rang out. Thomas cried out in pain, clutching his arm where a bullet had grazed him. The Prometheus team had caught up, led by Garrett Pierce himself. "Stop this madness!" Pierce shouted. "You have no idea what you're giving up." But it was too late. Oliver stepped into the center of the stone circle, the seed held high above his head. As Arya's chant reached its crescendo, a blinding light erupted from the seed, enveloping Oliver and spreading outward in a shockwave of pure magical energy. When the light faded, the Prometheus team found themselves unable to move, roots and vines holding them firmly in place. The forest had made its choice. Oliver turned to face them, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. When he spoke, it was with a voice that seemed to come from the forest itself. "The power you seek is not meant for human hands," he said. "The forest is its own entity, alive and aware. It chooses its guardians, and it has chosen us." As they watched in awe, the crystal seed dissolved into motes of light that spread throughout the forest, infusing every tree, every leaf, every creature with its magic. The forest had reclaimed its heart, becoming more vibrant and alive than ever before. Garrett Pierce and his team were escorted to the edge of the forest, their memories of the seed and its power gently erased by Arya's magic. They would remember only a failed expedition, a forest that held no special properties beyond its natural beauty. As the sun rose fully, bathing the forest in golden light, the Hawthorns stood with Arya at the edge of the clearing. They knew their lives would never be the same, but they were ready for the responsibility that came with being the forest's chosen guardians. Oliver, his eyes once again those of a young boy, but filled with wisdom beyond his years, took his parents' hands. Together, they walked into the heart of their magical home, ready to face whatever new adventures awaited them. And so, the forest continued to thrive, its secrets safe, its magic preserved, watched over by a family whose love for each other was matched only by their dedication to the wondrous world they had sworn to protect.